Hi, it's Michael from Oilers Live Podcast. Broadcasting tonight from Vancouver, where I just streamed the Oilers and Anaheim Ducks game. Congratulations to the Oilers for a nice, solid win tonight in the shootout. Tonight's guest is Jessica from Zodiac Hockey. Please listen through to the end. I think you'll find her insight refreshing, something new, an astrological take on hockey, and you might just end up being a believer.
Oilers Live Podcast. Oilers Live Podcast.
And welcome to episode 3 of the Oilers Live Podcast. I have as my guest tonight Jessica from Zodiac Hockey. Welcome, Jessica.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for joining me today. So you and I have had a chance to talk a little bit about Zodiac Hockey, and some of which I wanted to hear tonight and share with the listening audience. So I guess, if you could start somewhere, let's start with how long have you been doing this?
Well, I've been in sort of the astrology sector. My background is in sort of content development and astrology for over 20 years. And my love of hockey I've had for probably 15 years. So I had this in the last 2.5 years, this epiphany of merging the two. Until then, I'd never thought about taking the astrology content into sort of a sports vertical until one day I was sitting with my hockey guy friends and my beer league buddies. And I was watching a game and I was like, oh, that's happening because, the moon is full moon tonight and he's a Pisces and blah, blah, blah. And they just freaked out on me. They're like, Jessica, you've got to do something. Can you tell me what's going to happen to this guy? And they all wanted me to do predictions or, run charts for their friends that they were playing, in the beer leagues. And so they could give them grief in the locker rooms and just sort of have fun with it. And surprisingly, I couldn't get over how superstitious so many of them were. So I started kind of just creating this blog for fun on the side. It was kind of combining two of my favorite passions, which was hockey and astrology. And it took on this crazy life of its own. I started getting people hitting me up on Twitter, asking me about their fantasy leagues and what they should be doing, who they should be playing tonight, and what was happening astrologically. And I realized, wow, there's something kind of here. So I always like to kind of stress, I'm a hockey fan. Like I said, I didn't come to hockey until my 20s, and I didn't grow up in a hockey town. I grew up in Portland, Oregon. We have a WHL team, but I'm not Canadian. I'm not any of those. I can't check off all those boxes. So it was important to me to kind of work with people that really got it. So as I was writing content and just sort of, spreading my good karma around talking to different people, I sort of said, I got to start working with some real coaches. I want to know if what I'm seeing as a fan and as an astrologer is really manifesting on the bench. So I reached out to Mike Johnson, who is the head coach of the Portland Winterhawks, which is our WHL team here. And he was surprisingly receptive. I mean, it's funny what these coaches are looking for anything. There's this kind of universal backlash to the whole stats movement. I think everyone is trying to figure out, why they can't reconcile why stats don't play out to what they should. And I think as you start to actually talk to professional level coaches, and now I'm working with several coaches in the WHL because it's this pretty small world. As soon as you have success with one, and then also 2 AHL teams, my goal is to start working at the NHL level. But I think they start to they have a much different perspective of the game. I mean, as a fan, it's fantastic and fun, but it's also very exciting to talk about the fact that these people are players. They have personalities, they have problems, they have not mental issues, but, emotional issues that impact their ability to perform that are in no way being reflected in traditional stats or analytics. So that's what I'm doing. I'm kind of growing this idea, perfecting sort of the algorithm behind it to ultimately improve and bring this to fantasy players and start predicting and seeing how people perform, not only from, an analytical perspective or diagnostic one, but a behavioral one. What can we expect from this guy tonight?
So how much of this is, and you'll have to maybe educate me a little bit on, what astrology is. We've heard these things: numerology, astrology, a number of different things. How much of this has to do with, I go into the paper and I read my horoscope daily. Is that kind of like what you're looking at with the player? Is this, there's a daily thing happening, some sort of unseen force out there that might, give you a little extra boost of energy one day or a little less the next? How is that, how does that affect and what, we talk about the time of birth and place of birth and all of these little things. What's really going on in the background? How is that affecting how a player plays?
Well, yeah, that's the kind of the $1 million question. And I think how I like to describe it is that astrology dates back, hundreds and hundreds of years. So it was what I call our first stats, our first big data. We didn't have computers. We didn't have spreadsheets. We had the stars. And the earliest scientists would look up and they would map based on the movements of the planets how humans would behave and the shifts and patterns they would see. So it was a very pattern-based science. Was it as accurate as numbers and math and stats? No. But it was used literally by, kings and professors and scholars to make huge decisions. It was a little bit ridiculous, but at the time it was really the only pattern that we could decipher. And it was broken out based on mathematical movements that we could see of the planets. So there was this, and there continues to be this influence that we see, whether it's seasonal or whatever, based on where the planets are. And different people were impacted differently and they made different choices. So it truly was a behavioral science. Now, as we evolved and, technology and science, we were continuing to challenge the norms. We did find more, whatever, it got relegated to what you might call pseudoscience. It was purely behavioral. There was nothing, we could look under a microscope and say X and Y. Because there's still free will in everybody, behaviors are behaviors.
Absolutely.
And then but science is science and there's room for both and they need to play together well. So the way we use astrology now is we really go back to the science, and believe it or not, it's fairly complex because just like everything we do as humans, this was a real science. So you do talk about your sun sign, you're a Sagittarius, right? That's really at the lowest level. Like that really doesn't mean that much when we look at a player. I do that a lot just to kind of get people acclimated to it. But what I'm really looking at is when you're born, we're looking at all the planets and all the placements at that time that you were born and where you were born. And that really makes up your whole chart. And that's how when you meet another Sagittarius and you're like, God, I'm nothing like that guy. This is so weird. And it's like, well, of course you are not, because you also have many other placements in your chart that influence your whole composition. And then, of course, you're going to layer socio and economic, behaviors on top of how the person you become. But what astrology lets us do is it creates a baseline of what your default personality is. And I break it into, for sports and particularly, 6 primary categories. That is sort of your basic personality, your sun sign, your moon sign, which is where the moon was at the time of your birth. And that's really your emotional center. And then your Mercury, which is your communication. So how do you communicate as a player? Are you good? Are you vocal? Are you having issues communicating? How quickly are you processing information? Particularly important for, say, a goalie. How coachable are you? And then your Venus, which is your passion sign. And I want to talk about this and get into the Oilers because this is their biggest problem. But the Venus is, why do I play hockey at all? Like, why am I even here? Why am I this? This is why I get up every day. And, am I in alignment with everyone else? And then your Mars sign is, how do you behave under pressure? Like, everyone has your personality. We're all cool right now. We're cool. We're not under a lot of pressure. But when you're asked to go out under wartime conditions, there's notable shifts in how people handle that. And that is what we really look at for how somebody behaves during a game versus how they're behaving off ice or during a practice or even, whatever. So I look at all those factors and then we kind of put all that together as an individual. And then, yes, every single night something's happening, the moon's moving or something that can influence those defaults. And that's where the fantasy prediction component comes in. We look at Connor McDavid and say, okay, here's his default chart. Is anything here being sort of negatively or positively influenced? So that's where we look at the player to player. Then there's also the obvious, which is the compatibility across players. So we could talk about that too. But
when you look at a team like the Oilers, and you brought up, I believe it was the Venus sign, right, for passion. What's the first thing you notice, astrologically or in general?
Well, I think, again, so when I look at a total team compatibility, so getting away from any one specific individual, I mean, hockey is such a team sport, yes, you have all stars and everything, but the ability to work together and, is critical. And I think when we look at their Venus allocation, which is basically all their players, and then we look at the average placements of the planets, they are 45% fire signs, which is Leos, Scorpios, and Aries, which are very aggressive, ego-driven, sort of little more selfish, self-motivated. So their reason for playing hockey is they want to be seen. These are people who are playing hockey. They love hockey. They like to win. They're very competitive, but they're not necessarily super loyal. They're not playing because they love team and camaraderie. They're not necessarily playing because they love the work ethic. I mean, they're really just there because they want to be visible. And this is just what their motivator is. It's not a selfish thing or anything. It's just they have some big egos around why they're playing hockey. That's not a bad thing, but normally when you want a team that is I've patterned a lot of these over, Stanley Cup winning teams, and there are clear patterns over teams that are more successful over time or in short game series, whatever. And you really want more of a balanced allocation. So 45% in fire is very high, where they only have 10% in water signs, which is the Scorpios and the Cancer and the Pisces. And these are the more very loyal people. They're going to do anything for team over everything, a little less ego-driven, more sentimental, that type of personality type. So here you have this locker room full of guys where maybe they're just not able to find enough friends. You might have cliques, or you might have everyone who's maybe two on their own. And you're not creating this sense of united purpose, even though the coach may be sitting there saying this and everyone's nodding their head and that's all happening. Deep down, their decision-making is being influenced by, everyone does this, their own personal passion, and need. Why this hasn't paralyzed them is their Mars allocation. When they get out into the game, they really are a really well-balanced team. I mean, they have done a great job of scouting, because they clearly have all the right skill sets and they have a nice mix of it. And if you were to look at, I don't know them like you do from a technical statistical standpoint.
Yeah. And you know what? I think this is great because, you don't probably watch them as often as I do, but to hear your, interpretation from your vantage point, and it's so far, seems quite accurate. So,
well, that's good. Because I was going to say, I'm not an Oilers. I cover the whole league. So, and I talk to different people. Everyone's always curious. And so I honestly go in very objectively. I obviously know the big players and I know some of the superstars charts by heart, but it's very fun for me to just go in fresh and just go, wow, this is what's happening. And then sometimes I'll go look and see how they're doing in the standings and be like, oh, that makes sense, or whatever. But, yeah. So let me know what I'm right about. One of the things I did look at was the coaching, McClellan. I don't know much about his tenure there or if people love him or whatever, but there's options when you have an allocation that is so off, whether it's your Mars allocation, which you just can't pull it together during games, or you just don't have the passion. When you lack the passion, like the Oilers are, not the passion, but kind of the united sense of purpose, it just makes it hard to win consistently. The upside of the Oilers is they don't have a ton of volatility. So there's not in astrology and in game days there's the potential for some teams to just be super streaky, just like really hot for weeks and then really cold and just, really no ability to kind of establish consistency. They don't necessarily have that from a technical standpoint, but from an energetic level, they do. So that's probably why, I don't know how they're doing this season. I know they're down there, but it's not great. But
they did win tonight, so that's a good sign.
But even just watching their energy on the bench, how would you describe it? Like, do you feel like it's consistent game to game, or?
No, it lacks consistency. There's no doubt there. The whole team has lacked some consistency this year, and there's obviously so many different things, but there is the one thing they're consistent on is at home this year they have the worst penalty kill in the league. It's sitting around 50%, and you don't need to know anything about anything to know that's awful and is a part of their downfall this year. This is interesting to me because if you can look at all the players. I don't know if you did sort of prior to us getting on here tonight, but if you were to go just from an astrology standpoint, would there be a line that you would put together out of the players that you know? Like with Connor McDavid, are there two players that can you see that? Like, is that something that you could, or you would advise, say the Winterhawks on or something like that? Like who might be best with a certain player?
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of the bigger questions I'm often asked, which is line compatibility and pairings. So I did run for McDavid, just different variations on who. And I did this when you guys got Lucic not that long ago. I guess that was last.
Yeah.
Last season. Kind of wanted to see the impact he would have on there. And I remember in my articles up there buried somewhere, but he and McDavid are not highly compatible. So anytime I'm running those charts, and they're not compatible, like they aren't good friends or anything. It's just their style of game and the energy and the approach and just everything about their games is not super organic. Like they were going to have to work to make that work. Whereas there are definitely some lines that are more plug and play. And there's a mathematical algorithm that I use, and I have actually perfected from working with these coaches and getting input from them on what they think are the factors that really influence compatibility. So for McDavid, I don't think Maroon, what's up with him right now? Is he playing? Patrick?
Well, he's suspended for 2 games.
I saw something and I thought,
night, yeah.
Dang, I think he's out. But for him and Puljujärvi, is that how you say that?
Yeah, Puljujärvi. Yeah.
Puljujärvi. He and McDavid and Maroon have the highest percent compatibility. They're 78% compatible. And I don't know. Do they play together much?
Well, last year they did, and they were quite successful.
Mm-hmm.
Puljujärvi was new, so he wasn't playing last year, but he's been playing with McDavid this year, and over the course of, I'd say, the last probably 14, 15 games, they've really got a nice chemistry going. And your analysis of Lucic and McDavid would be, dead on. I mean, the two of them are like oil and water out there, at least from my vantage point. The coach continues to put them together. But if you spend any time on Twitter and you do the hashtag Oilers, you'll find a number of Twitter folks out there that would say he's crazy for having them on the same line. They're not compatible. And, but Puljujärvi and McDavid are, and we had seen Maroon with McDavid the last game, and they seem to be getting a little bit going together. But they haven't been together this year. I would say if I was to put lines together, seeing how they've played, like actually watching them play, I think that's pretty accurate. So, that's good assessment for somebody who doesn't watch them.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's interesting because I know I watched the playoffs last year and you guys were really exciting then. It was like all of a sudden this, you guys came alive and of course playing, I think it was San Jose or something, one of my California teams, which I like. San
Jose and Anaheim, actually. Yeah.
Yeah. So we had, Draisaitl, am I saying that right? Draisaitl. He was really big in the playoffs. You kept hearing about him, and I was like, oh, God, this guy, what's up with him? And of course, I ran his chart. He has a very explosive chart, and I thought, I wonder how he is going to pair with, this. And believe it or not, he's good because he's just got this potential to be great under pressure, but he's a playoffs guy. Like, there are certain players whose charts do really well under short pressure, but if you give them too much time or too long, not enough pressure, they're just not going to be able to dig deep. So whereas Puljujarvi or whatever, he's a Taurus. I mean, he is like an elite grinder. He's ultimate complementary player. He's the guy that's going to come in and play with an all-star and actually bring value. He's not going to be kind of doing his own little pony, competing or necessarily going rogue. He's really good, just complimentary player and talented. So I feel like, him with the Libra, Connor McDavid is this Libra, which is very interesting because he is, I'd love to do a whole podcast about him versus like a Sidney Crosby and the differences. But he's definitely a generous player during games. So it's him and Maroon. This is a very creative player. So the three of them actually make for a pretty good combo. I think if the coach could figure out kind of the secret sauce on all the other lines to kind of do that, that would be pretty cool.
Of course, it's my opinion, but and I told you sort of prior to the show where I stood in my belief on astrology, and but you're blowing me away right now.
Oh, okay.
You're pretty dead on as far as I see the game. I mean, it's Draisaitl's had not the same success that he had in the playoffs last year. And certainly I noticed the same things, that short bursts of pressure, he seems to do quite well. But when he's counted on sort of over the long term, he seems to have been struggling.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, you brought up something that's important, I guess, to understand, which is there's always free will and the ability to change that. What, how does somebody work on that though? Like when they, you have, is it just a matter of being self-aware of what your astrology, is telling you, or, what do you do about that? Is it more about self-awareness, or is there something that you can do to combat, what the stars might be telling us?
Well, I mean, I think that's where astrology has landed now as a science or as a value-added, science, is that it really can help anybody deal with any of their problems. Like the starting point is looking at what your default personality attributes are. Like what do you do under given circumstances? And then, you can decide what to do with that. I'll be honest with you. So another segment that I'm working with is the youth hockey market. So I'm working with USA Hockey, and we're creating, reports for young hockey players. And these hockey parents all want to know if their kid's the next, Connor McDavid. But, they can go in and they can run their child's chart and they can see, okay, here's kind of the default temperament. And after studying historical and the current league, there definitely is a chart. I could tell you right now, I could look at a chart and say, this guy will never play in the NHL. Like there's just no way they have the temperament. And, no one wants to hear that, right? But you can see really what it takes to that level of commitment at any athletic commitment, getting into the NHL or even AHL or that level. It takes a pretty extreme personality and some pretty concentrated personality attributes. So you can identify that and do whatever you want about it. You can also look and see, maybe you're not going to be great at this, but you could be a great coach. Like you might be really good at commentary, like your chart. I pulled it up like literally 2 seconds before we talked, but I mean, you've got all this Gemini in there. You're just a natural communicator, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you couldn't be a great hockey player. Maybe you were, I don't know, but I just know that, you have other strengths. And so the goal is to kind of help play to those strengths and decide. And of course, if you really, really want something, you can do anything in life. But you just have to be willing to own that energy, because when you do get to the competitive level, there's very little room for you to not be on your game, and it's easy to slip. So that's the advice and coaches are often asking me, like, what do I do with this kid? And one of the cool things about the WHL or these younger leagues is there really are development leagues. So they're trying to weed out the craft. I mean, they're really trying to find the players that are going to make it. And we're finding that this is an extremely valuable tool to help them with that.
So, there's a couple things that I think are, I'd like to know about. One is the Oilers have the Dallas Stars coming up on Saturday. Is there anything on Saturday that might tell us kind of what to expect from the Oilers, whether it's from an energy level or anything that you would look and say, this might be something to watch for on Saturday?
Well, I knew. So you told me you were going to ask me about Saturday. So I did look into that. And I got to say, the good thing about Saturday is that the game, I believe, is at 1 p.m. Mountain Time, which is a good thing because earlier that morning, there's some kind of lunar movements, some moon stuff. But later in the night, if it would have been an evening game, it would have been a totally different story because there's some stuff going on. But really, we kind of hit it in the sweet spot. And as boring as it sounds, it's what I would call in my fantasy league predictions a best team wins game, which means there's no excuses. You can't blame astrology on this one. It's like, this is just, whoever has the best team. But I will say, you go back to that default thing. So you have teams that are just constructed better organically. So that's when on these games you look at the team. So I said, I'll look at the Stars and look at not the Stars, I'll look at the Dallas Stars. And I looked at their allocation and I kind of quickly analyzed it. And I will say they have a very similar problem to the Oilers, which is that they have not so much the ego problem, but they have a disproportionate number of players that are actually the opposite. They're in earth signs. So this is going to be a big matchup of earth versus fire on Saturday because their passion comes from this crazy ability to kind of ground it out. And they really don't have the ability to adjust their style very much. They're not a very creative team. They kind of are like they feel a bit of entitlement. They feel like if we put in the hours, we should win. And they just keep thinking that way. Whereas the Oilers are not so much there. They're like, we want to be the best. We got to do the best. So it's going to be this interesting matchup between them. I think if the Oilers, if they really wanted to win, they should consider playing a little bit more opportunistic, unpredictable and changing things, maybe challenging plays more often or switching up the lines or even changing the tempo a lot. That would actually throw a team like the Stars off, because their temperament is they really like structure. They believe that if they do it the right way that they're going to win versus a little bit more of, hey, let's just win at any cost, which is a little bit more the Oilers style. It's just like, just win. So to me, those two, it really could come down to the coaching. The coach really needs to see that this is the opportunity. How are they going to get the Stars off of their game? And I don't know that the coaches ever look at it that way, but that's what I would recommend.
Well, I think just about every Oilers fan out there right now is hoping that they are looking at it that way. It seems this year we've had a lot of the same and not trying anything different. So, you know what? I'm doubtful that McClellan's going to listen to my podcast, but I sure wish he would because I think that would be great advice for him. Whether it's from an astrology standpoint or just a view of the game standpoint, because that's exactly what's needed come Saturday. So I do appreciate that, and I appreciate your time. I would like to hear just a little bit about how people contact you. What kind of things maybe you could help them out with? Tell me a little bit about Zodiac Hockey and, your chance to kind of plug Zodiac Hockey and some of what you're doing right now.
Oh, well, thank you. I feel like I talked all about myself, but I'm happy to, like I said, I'm in the karma business. So I'm out there to help anybody who loves hockey and who's just trying to kind of see, particularly fans, because we love the game and we love our players and we devote so much of our energy towards it.
My apologies to Jessica. It looks like we had a bit of an audio problem at the end of the episode tonight. What we finished with was her explaining where to find her on Twitter at Zodiac Hockey or her website, zodiachockey.com. She does want everybody to know that she's a fan and she does this for the fans. So please feel free to direct message her, read her blog, retweet her tweets, have some fun, and enjoy the game.
Oilers Live.